They left the Lakota girl chained in the river until a giant cowboy cut her free at midnight. The moon sat heavy over the frozen river, its light spilling silver across the current that carried the sound of chains. The girl's wrists were bound to a half-buried post, water swirling to her chest, her lips blue from the cold. Somewhere downstream, a lantern swung on a horseback, voices calling, laughter breaking against the night like glass. She tried to scream, but her throat was too raw. Then, from the opposite bank, boots crunched in the frost. A shadow moved through the reeds, broad, deliberate, silent. The man was built like the mountain itself, shoulders wrapped in a weather-beaten coat, hair dripping from melted snow. His name was Jonah Red, though the frontier called him the Giant. He saw the chains first, then the girl's face. "Hold still," he said, voice low but certain. She flinched, not trusting anyone who spoke that gently in a world this cruel. He waded in, water freezing around his knees, knife flashing once in the moonlight. "Who did this?" he asked. She swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the hill. "Men from the ranch," she whispered. "Said a Lakota should know her place." The words shook him more than the cold. He cut the last link, caught her as she fell, and carried her through the shallows as the lanterns across the river flared brighter. A gunshot cracked the silence, the bullet skimming the water beside them. Jonah ducked, holding her close, and ran toward the timberline. Behind them, the laughter turned into shouts, then into the sound of men swearing vengeance. In his arms, the girl barely breathed, but her hand clutched his coat like a promise. "You're safe now," he murmured, though even he didn't believe it yet. The river hissed behind them, swallowing the moonlight whole. Jonah didn't stop running until the sound of the river was only an echo behind them. The girl's head lolled against his shoulder, her breath shallow, body trembling with the kind of cold that made silence sound like mercy. He pushed through a line of pines, snow falling from the branches in thin silver sheets, until he reached a hollow where his horse waited tied to a stump. "Easy, ghost," he muttered, lowering her gently onto a blanket by the roots. Her skin was nearly translucent, lashes dusted white, lips split from cold and fear. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, his pulse hammering from more than the run. "Stay with me," he said. Her eyes opened a crack, brown and wild. "Why?" The word scraped out like a splinter. "Why would you care?" Jonah poured whiskey from his saddlebag into a tin cup and held it to her lips. "Because somebody should have cared before." She drank weakly, eyes closing again. The wind hissed between the trees, carrying the faint echo of horses far below. Voices calling, still searching. He checked his rifle, every muscle coiled tight. Whoever those men were, they'd ridden with the kind of confidence that came from owning fear. He'd seen that kind before. Ranch lords who thought the land and the people breathing on it were theirs by law or by gun. He looked back at the girl. Her wrists were red and raw where the iron had bitten skin, her breath trembling in the space between sleep and death. He cleaned the wounds with melted snow, hands steady, but jaw locked. "Name?" he asked softly. After a long pause, she whispered, "Tala." "Tala," he repeated. "You're safe now." She shook her head faintly. "No one's safe when they find out who I am." Jonah frowned. "They already know enough to want you dead." Her eyes opened again, fierce despite her weakness. "That's not what I mean." The wind caught the corner of her blanket, revealing a small leather pouch tied at her throat, marked with the carved shape of a hawk. Jonah stared at it, realization flickering. "You're not just Lakota." he said quietly. You're someone they're afraid of. She nodded weakly. My father was their guide, till they killed him for choosing the wrong side. Jonah looked down the valley where firelight flickered faintly against the dark. Then we ain't got long, he said, pulling her close and tightening his grip on the rifle. The mountain's about to remember what justice sounds like. By sunrise, the cold had softened to a pale mist crawling through the trees, and Jonah's small fire crackled low between them. Tala stirred beneath his coat, her face flushed now with the faint color of returning life. He'd hardly slept, one eye always on the ridge, every sound of the forest reminding him they were still being hunted. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was him kneeling by the fire, carving something from a scrap of pine with a knife that gleamed in the orange light. You should rest, she said hoarsely. You should have stayed dead, he replied quietly, not as cruelty but truth. She frowned, confused. Those men, they'll come again. Jonah nodded, setting the carving aside. A small hawk shaped like the mark on her pouch. Let 'em. I've been waiting for a reason to stop running from ghosts. Tala sat up, wincing. You don't understand. They weren't just men from a ranch. They worked for Cole Bishop. Jonah froze at the name. The fire popped. Bishop, he repeated, voice flat. Owns half the cattle west of here. She nodded slowly. Owns the people too. My father refused to help him build a road through sacred land. He was chained to the same river I was. He didn't survive. Jonah's jaw clenched. And Bishop thought you'd learn obedience from watching it. Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't look away. I didn't cry. That's why he called me cursed. Jonah stood, kicking snow over the fire. Then he's about to learn what cursed feels like. He moved toward his horse, tightening the saddle. Tala tried to rise. You'll die if you face him alone. Then I'll take a few devils with me. She pushed herself up, swaying. You saved me. Don't waste it. Jonah turned, meeting her gaze. Firelight catching the scar along his jaw, eyes like weathered steel. I ain't the saving kind, girl. I just don't like seeing chains on anyone. She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. You can't run from this either. He looked away, but something in her voice rooted him to the ground. For the first time in years, Jonah felt like fate had given him more than survival. It had given him a cause worth dying for. They left the hollow before noon, climbing toward higher ground where the trees grew close and the air smelled of cedar and frost. Jonah led the horse through the drifts, Tala riding wrapped in his blanket, her eyes scanning every shadow as though the forest still held her captor's laughter. You don't talk much, she said finally, voice low. Jonah grunted. Talking never stopped bullets. Maybe not, she replied, but it keeps you human. He glanced back at her, the faintest smirk tugging his mouth. You think I forgot how to be? She met his gaze, steady. You forgot why it matters. The words hit harder than she knew. By midday, the trail narrowed beside a frozen creek. They stopped where the water vanished under ice, and Jonah built a small fire beneath an overhang. Tala crouched near it, rubbing her hands, the heat drawing life back into her fingers. You should have left me, she murmured. If Bishop finds you, he'll kill you too. Jonah took a slow drink from his flask. Men like him already tried, long time ago. You lost someone, she said quietly. He didn't answer, but she saw it in the way his eyes darkened. My brother, he said finally. Worked Bishop's land, same as I did. When he stood up for a beaten hand, they hung him from the windmill. He tossed a stick into the fire, watching it spark. That's when I stopped being a man and started being a ghost. Tala's eyes softened. Then why save me? He met her gaze across the fire. Because maybe ghosts still remember what right looks like. She stared at him for a long moment, then pulled the small hawk carving from his saddlebag. You made this for me. He nodded. So you don't forget who you are. She smiled faintly, fingers tracing the wings. I won't, but neither should you. The air shifted, quiet and deep, and for a heartbeat the mountains seemed to listen. Jonah looked away first, clearing his throat. Eat something, he muttered, handing her jerky. She took it, still smiling. You're kinder than you pretend, Jonah read. He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. Don't mistake decency for kindness, Tala. One's duty, the other's danger. Outside the cave, the first crows began to circle the valley, as if the mountain already knew blood would soon stain the snow again. By the time dusk bled through the pines, the air had turned sharp and restless, carrying the scent of wood smoke from far below. Jonah crouched at the edge of a ridge, peering through his spyglass at the valley. Down there, torches flickered. 5 riders, maybe 6, spread wide like wolves scenting blood. They're closing in, he said, lowering the glass. Tala's heart stuttered. Bishop's men? No one else rides this far north with chains in their saddlebags. He rose, shouldering his rifle. We'll move by night. She caught his arm. You can't keep running forever. Ain't running, he said flatly. Just choosing where I bleed. He turned toward the horse, tightening the straps, when the first shot cracked through the trees. The bullet buried itself in the trunk beside his head, bark exploding. Down, he shouted, pulling her behind the rocks. Voices echoed from the slope below, taunting, confident. Jonah read. Bishop says that Lakota girl's his property. Hand her over, and you might keep your skin. Jonah chambered around, face hard. Tell him the mountain don't trade in slaves. He fired, the echo rolling like thunder. One rider fell. Another shouted orders, shots answering from every side. Snow burst into white mist as bullets tore through the branches. Tala clutched her pouch, whispering a prayer in Lakota, words the wind seemed to carry upward. They'll burn the forest to find us, she said. Jonah's jaw tightened. Then we'll bury them in it. He tossed her a small pistol from his belt. Ever fired one? No. Point and pull if they get close. He rose, firing again, smoke curling around him like a halo of ash. Tala crawled to his side, her breath quick. Why not leave me? She asked. You could vanish. Jonah reloaded, eyes never leaving the shadows. Because vanishing never made the world right. Another bullet grazed his arm, tearing fabric and flesh. He barely flinched. You're bleeding, she gasped. So's the mountain, he said through his teeth. But it's still standing. The wind whipped their hair, the sound of horses rising from below like thunder chasing judgment. Jonah fired once more, hitting a lantern. Flames erupted down the slope, setting the brush ablaze. Now, he said, grabbing her hand, we make the mountain fight with us. The fire spread faster than either of them expected, climbing the trees like it had been waiting for this moment. Smoke rolled through the valley, thick and black, turning torchlight into ghosts. Jonah pulled Tala higher up the ridge, coughing hard, blood from his shoulder mixing with soot. Keep low, he barked. She stumbled but followed, her fingers digging into the snow for balance. Below, Bishop's riders cursed as flames caught their coats and horses screamed through the chaos. We can't outrun fire, Tala gasped. Jonah spun toward her, eyes burning. We ain't outrunning. We're out thinking. He pointed toward a split in the cliffside, barely visible through the smoke. There's an old mining shaft up there. Go! He covered her with gunfire as she ran, reloading between breaths. The heat seared his face, and when one bullet ripped across his ribs, he nearly fell. Tala turned back, shouting his name. "Don't stop!" he yelled, staggering to his feet. A rider burst through the fire, face twisted in fury. Jonah fired once, the man collapsing into the snow with a grunt. He reached the cave just as the last of the burning trees began to fall, sparks raining like hellfire behind them. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole, the air damp and cold. Tala grabbed his arm, feeling the warm blood beneath his coat. "You're hurt bad." He laughed weakly. "I've been worse." "You're lying." "Yeah," he admitted, leaning against the wall. "But it sounds brave." She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound. "Hold still," she said, tears threatening but held back. "Why won't you let me help you?" he asked softly. "Because help costs too much in my world." "Then maybe you need a new one," he whispered. A sound outside, boots crunching, faint voices. They froze. Bishop's men had found the cave. Jonah drew his knife, whispering, "Stay behind me." The torchlight glowed through the entrance as 3 shadows entered. Tala reached for the pistol, breath sharp, and the mountain held its breath with her. The first man stepped forward, sneering. "End of the line, Red." Jonah smiled grimly. "Not yet." The knife flew, the pistol barked, and the world exploded into violence. When it ended, only the wind moved through the shaft again, carrying the smoke of men who'd hunted mercy and found their own ending instead. When the echoes of gunfire finally died, only the mountain spoke. Creaking, sighing, shedding snow from the trees like the weight of sin. Jonah leaned against the cave wall, panting, blood dark along his ribs. The 3 bodies near the entrance lay still, torches guttering in the cold wind that crept inside. Tala knelt beside him, pressing her palms against the wound to slow the bleeding. "You can't keep saving me like this," she whispered, voice trembling between gratitude and fear. He gave a hoarse laugh that turned into a cough. "Didn't plan on it. You're just too stubborn to die easy." She looked up, eyes fierce through the tears. "You risked everything for me. For someone you barely know." Jonah's gaze softened. "Didn't need to know you. I knew what they were." He shifted painfully, staring toward the glowing mouth of the cave where snow still fell through the smoke. "They call this land Bishop's territory," he muttered. "But I reckon it's always belonged to those who bled to keep it alive." Tala wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Then don't let him own it anymore." The words carried the strength of a vow, and he felt something stir that had been buried under years of bitterness, purpose. He took her hand, rough against her small fingers. "What are you asking me to do?" She met his eyes without fear. "Help me take back my father's land. Not for revenge, for truth." Jonah thought of his brother hanging from that windmill, the way the sun had set behind him like a promise of judgment. He nodded once. "Then we start at dawn." "You can't even stand," she said. "I'll crawl if I have to." A faint smile broke through her exhaustion. "You mean that?" "I don't waste words, Tala." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment the cave felt less like a tomb and more like a beginning. Outside, the wind shifted, clearing the smoke, revealing stars sharp and cold above the ridge. Jonah stared at them through the darkness, his grip tightening around his rifle. "Maybe ghosts can learn to fight for the living again," he murmured. Tala closed her eyes. Then we fight together. The mountain groaned softly above them, the sound like an old god waking. And for the first time since he'd buried his brother, Jonah Red believed the world might still remember mercy. Dawn bled pale and cold across the valley, painting the smoke trails from the burning forest in ribbons of ash. Jonah and Tala stood at the cave mouth, the wind cutting through them like the memory of fire. His bandaged ribs ached, but the fire in his eyes burned clean now. "He'll come himself," Jonah said quietly. "Bishop, don't leave vengeance to hired hands." Tala nodded, gripping the pistol he'd given her. "Then we end it today." They moved down the ridge in silence, snow crunching under their boots, the scent of charred pine still heavy in the air. When they reached the frozen river, the one where she'd nearly died, the tracks of Bishop's men were already pressed deep into the crusted surface. From the far bank, a voice carried, a drawl smooth as oil and twice as slick. "You've caused me trouble." Red. Cole Bishop sat his horse beneath the same moon-paled trees, flanked by 4 riders and a shotgun resting on his thigh. "That girl's property of my estate." Jonah raised his rifle, his breath fogging. "Then your estate's built on ghosts?" Bishop smiled, slow and cruel. "You really think the law cares what color the dead were?" Jonah's answer came in the form of thunder, the rifle's crack echoing through the valley. The shot ripped Bishop's hat clean off, grazing his temple. The riders fired back, bullets screaming off rock and ice. Tala ran to the river's edge, returning fire, the recoil bruising her shoulder. Jonah moved like a storm, each shot finding its mark, each breath a prayer he didn't know he remembered. One rider went down, then another. Bishop dismounted, charging through the snow, shotgun blazing. Jonah met him halfway, tackling him hard enough to send both crashing through the ice into the freezing current. The water stole their breath, numbing thought and fear. Bishop clawed for his pistol underwater, but Jonah's hand found the chain still wrapped around his own wrist. He looped it once, twice, and pulled. The iron sang as it tightened. "That's for every name you buried," he growled. Bishop's eyes went wide, bubbles spilling from his mouth, and then he was gone, dragged into the black current below. Jonah broke the surface, gasping, the cold cutting deeper than any wound. Tala ran into the river, hauling him up, sobbing with relief. "It's over," she whispered. He looked toward the sun rising over the ridge, blood and frost mingling on his face. "No," he said, voice trembling. "Now it begins." By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the fire had burned itself to silence, and the valley below lay buried under mist. Jonah's hands shook as he cleaned the blood from his coat. But it wasn't the cold this time. It was the weight of what he'd done, and what he hadn't. Tala sat beside him near the half-frozen river, the one that had almost become her grave. The current ran slow now, catching glints of light like glass. "He's gone," she said softly. Jonah nodded once. "The mountain took him. Same as it takes every man who forgets it, don't bow to power." For a long moment they just listened to the water, their breaths mingling with the rising steam. Finally, she looked at him. "You could leave now. No one would blame you." He stared out at the horizon. "I've been leaving my whole life. Maybe it's time I build something that stays." She smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the small hawk carving hanging from her neck. "My father used to say the hawk don't fly to escape. It flies to see where it belongs." Jonah glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Then maybe I've been flying blind till now." He helped her to her feet, and together they crossed the river where the ice had thinned. boots breaking the surface but holding. On the far side, the land stretched wild and open, unclaimed again. Jonah stopped, looking back once at the black water that had ended a tyrant's reign and given two souls a second chance. "You think mercy can live in a place like this?" he asked. Tala slipped her hand into his. "It already does." The wind shifted, carrying the cry of a distant hawk overhead. Jonah watched it circle higher and higher until it vanished into the morning sun. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. Just a man, breathing, forgiven, alive. Spring returned slow to the mountain, like a wounded thing learning how to breathe again. The river that had once chained Tala now ran clean and quiet, whispering to the stones it had buried. Jonah stood by its edge, his coat open to the sunlight, scars pink and fading against skin that no longer belonged to a ghost. The land stretched wide and unclaimed before him, green shoots pushing through thawed soil, the scent of new life rising where blood had fallen. Tala walked toward him from the cabin they'd rebuilt together, her hair unbound, the small carved hawk glinting at her throat. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice carrying on the wind. Jonah nodded, eyes following the river's bend. "The mountain remembers," he murmured. "Even mercy leaves footprints." She stepped closer, slipping her hand into his, the warmth grounding him more than sunlight ever could. "You gave me back more than freedom," she whispered. "You gave me a place to stand." He turned to her with a faint, tired smile. "You gave me a reason to stop running." Above them, a hawk circled, its shadow sweeping across the valley like a benediction. The two watched it rise higher, the wind catching its wings until it vanished into the blue. "Maybe that's what living is," Jonah said quietly. "Remembering what was lost and choosing not to let it die again." Tala leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closing as the river sang below. The mountain sighed, the air clean, the world remade. Mercy had come full circle. "Thank you for traveling these roads with me. If stories of mercy, courage, and second chances speak to your heart, another tale waits for you right here on Crimson West."